Okay. Latest live stream. It's 12th of February 2024. I'm just looking at an option at screen, so I'm not quite sure what that means. And I'm still the only one here. So, anyway, the usual drill. I'll wait for people to come by. Doing dishes here whilst I'm participating. So, let's see. The usual thing. I'll see how this goes, see if there's interaction. So if you tune in, then please say something so I know that you're there. Then we can get a live stream going. Like I say, when I think people are participating, I'll engage, and otherwise I'll just be talking to myself, so it'll be a bit silly. Still no one turning up? Always try these things when someone turns up, of course. Okay, two. So at least one other person's watching. Please do say hello so that I know you're there. There might be a few seconds between posting a comment and it appearing. Jamali, welcome. Hello. How are you? So, Jamali, if you've been to my live streams before, you'll know how this goes. Just kind of get a few people tuning in so we could get a bit of a dialogue going. You'll excuse me doing the dishes as I'm doing this. It's just to kind of get multitasking, I should say. So, Jamali, are you in the UK or where are you commenting from? It's always good to get a sort of idea of my audience. Not the best angle to be doing this, but have to work with where the table is and so on. Sarasota, Florida, welcome. It's quite something, you know. We take this for granted now in the 21st century. I mean, you know, I'm talking to someone across the Atlantic, and it's normal nowadays. But 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that would be a novelty. Such is the internet. But welcome. Have you subscribed to my channel for a while? I assume you are a subscriber. 6 in the morning early. Are you an early riser, Jamali? I'm usually not, but I've got back to a semi-normal sleeping structure now. It's 11:44 a.m. in the UK. Are you having sleeping problems, or because that's something I could definitely relate to? Well, maybe what we'll find if other people tune into this live stream, it could be engaging. I always like to speak to all my subscribers, but obviously more people, more interaction going on. But you know, since it's just us at the moment, I may as well talk about it. I've had a lot of sleeping issues over the years. I'm not formally diagnosed, but I have something called DSPS, or delayed sleep phase syndrome. I've sort of self-diagnosed. Looked at the symptoms online, and it's basically where you're up very, very late, sometimes all night, and it's just a very irregular sleeping pattern. I'd probably be suited for a night shift job. I'm in the US Marine Corps. I'm used to waking up early. All right, so I guess are you living in the barrack, or would that be like the routine drill? My brother's in the military, so he could probably relate to that. Yeah, I guess. I mean, obviously, like I'm a civilian, but my perception of the military is early morning drills. Um, I guess there's a good side, though. You get fresh morning air, so I suppose that's something. And Florida's not a cold state, so that would be my perception. Jeremy, welcome. Welcome to the live stream. Just talking to Jamali about sleeping structure here. Hopefully we'll get a few more people. We can get this going. You'll notice I'm doing the dishes, just trying to multitask. Once they're done, I'll go to the desk, but may as well multitask while I'm doing this. Jeremy, can I ask where you are? Jamali's in Florida. And then I'm afraid I can't pronounce that name, but good day. Not a cold state, but can get pretty cold. That's interesting. What would be the low in Florida? What would be the lowest sort of temperature you'd get there? In the UK, I think some parts of Scotland and some rural areas in winter could get down to maybe -10 average. And then summer, a few years ago, we hit 30, so it's getting hotter. But average would be more like 23, 24. Agreed with your police videos. Poor policing these days. I'm from Derbyshire. Yeah, and actually Derbyshire Police is one that came under scrutiny during COVID with the ridiculous use of drones. You'll probably know what I'm referring to. Yeah, I mean it's a very big issue on both sides of the Atlantic, and it's you know, in this country we have a model of policing by consent. I'm not anti-police for the record, but it does really bother me when they abuse their power, which erodes public trust. I mean, it's a fundamental point of democracy. 40 degrees, yeah, I can imagine that in Florida. My brother actually didn't live in Florida. He lived in Louisiana, so in a Gulf state for a few years. Then he moved to Georgia, so he was used to those sort of temperatures. When I worked in China, the summers out there get pretty hot. And with my hair color, I can't take a huge amount of heat, although I do expect it when I'm in a warmer part of the world. So, Jamali, what would be a low in Florida? What would be considered low there? And would that be a winter time, or I'm just curious what a low in Florida would be? I mean, would you ever get under zero? Would it ever get down to that in any parts of the state? I know a few years ago, Texas had a cold snap. It was actually frost, snow in Texas, which seems hard to believe, but it happens. You even get snow in parts of the Middle East. When my brother done a tour of duty, I won't go into too many details, obviously, but when he done a tour of duty out there, he said the nights were incredibly cold. Around 6 Derbyshire police officers this year have been sleeping with vulnerable women. Yeah, I mean, it's despicable. And, here's the thing, Jeremy. I think there's extremes in the police because if it isn't pandering to avert sensitivities and policing in the wrong areas, then it's basically people who shouldn't be wearing a uniform. People are abusing the uniform. Um, there's unquestionably misogynistic elements. I think there is racism. I think there's other problems in the forces, but it's extremes. I mean, what happened to back to basics policing? I'm sure there's good officers out there, but what they need to get is that every time officers abuse their position, it's bad PR for the force as a whole. And I think forces vary, but some are worse than others. But across the board, there's examples of police abusing the power, like that idiot who harassed the gospel singer outside a church, or the British Transport Police officer who had a go at Brendan Kavanagh, who I made a few videos about that. Never under zero, but 40 degrees is pretty low for us. Oh, for all right, I'm with you, Jamali. Sorry, 40 Fahrenheit. I'm thinking Celsius. Yeah, I can't convert that off the top of my head, but it does seem pretty low. I think it just shows how desperate men are for female validation, sexually or otherwise, consensual or not. Are you referring to the police thing? I'm sorry, I can't. It looks like a Cyrillic alphabet. I don't know if you're Ukrainian or Russian. Excuse me, I don't know. Um, but I can't pronounce your name in that. But if you're referring to the police thing, I think it just shows how desperate men are for female validation. It may be, but if someone's wearing a uniform, they should not be targeting vulnerable women. In that sense, people who may, I mean, for example, if they're sex workers and it's like, we'll sleep with you in exchange for protection or something. I don't know. Jeremy might know the details of this, but I think that's very troubling. I just wish there was more professional standards legislation with police. Yeah, the police. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing I find infuriating. It's always about after the fact. There's always an apology, and occasionally officers lose their job, and very, very once in a blue moon they face justice. But the question gets down to how are they training people? I mean, you know, in the emergency services, in the fire service, ambulance service, definitely in the armed forces, they have certain criteria for joining. Now, to me, to be a police officer, you need a few basic things. You need courage. You need tough skin to be able to handle those situations without losing control. You need a good sense of judgment. You need to know the law. Well, the latter two seem to be missing. A lot of police officers don't seem to know the law, and they seem to lack common sense. Um, so definitely there is an issue about training. Now, a lot of decent officers who are doing their job, who are apprehending criminals, doing what they're meant to do, will say, "Oh, but it's not fair that we're getting this bad PR." But my point would be, if they're not condemning those who shame the uniform, if they're not doing anything about it, then they can't really complain. It's a bit like if you have 10 officers, and let's say 8 of them are good officers, so decent, they do their job, they try to protect the public, and 2 of them are corrupt, right? One is a misogynistic bully, the other is just sheer incompetent. Those 2 will get the headlines, and maybe that's unfair, but this is what the police need to understand. If they don't do anything about it, if the other 8 officers are not speaking out, then they can't really complain. I mean, I was thinking with the Wayne Couzens and David Carrick thing, and Jamali, for your benefit, these were 2 Metropolitan Police officers who committed serious crimes. One of them was a murderer, and the other was a serious rapist. They, they went to jail. They're serving long sentences, but the question is, well, what about all those decent officers? Why didn't they speak up? Why were these guys allowed to act with impunity for so long? And then you have a situation where it's one offense after another, and they still get to wear a uniform. Now, in my mind, one small mistake you could forgive, but the second they abuse their power, that should be it. There should be no second chances. Um, Not for that. Let's see. I'm just trying to keep it because of the loop thing with comments. Some of them may take a few seconds to appear, so bear with me. Yes, please. Well, yeah, not comments. So you guys may have typed something else, but it'll take a few seconds to appear. So we'll get back to the washing up. But that's the thing. I mean, it's all about accountability of power, and I think it really infuriates the public when there's a perception of double standards. Having said that, the other extreme, recently I joined an online group called the Public Safety Forum. It was about crime, antisocial behaviour, and so on. It was set up by a police officer. And I made this point to him. I said, look, I support what you're doing, but you must also recognise that there's bad PR for the police right now. And he made the point that he welcomed corrupt officers being held to account, but legislation can't shackle police in the work. So I think what he was referring to is if you have a situation, for example, where police are doing their job, they're apprehending suspects, and then you get a conflation with, say, a group like Black Lives Matter or some other pressure group that will then maybe scream racism no matter what, then their hands are tied, whereby they really could be doing their job, but they're shackled by political correctness. I think that's a problem. But what we come down to is a balancing act. People don't want the police to abuse their power, but they also don't want incompetent police who are failing to apprehend criminals. I mean, we have a situation now, and actually, it's not dissimilar in the United States, in California particularly, where the police have more or less given up, where you get shoplifters just acting with impunity. Um, and police won't even respond to these crimes anymore, yet they simultaneously say they urge the public to report crimes. But what's the point if they're not going to act on it? What's your view on the Israel offensive at the moment and the eventual outcome? It's a good question. It's apologies, guys. I'm trying to angle this. If you look where my sink is, it's kind of at an angle. So I want to look at the screen while I'm talking, but it's a bit difficult. So I'll try and hopefully it won't affect the volume. So Israel Gaza, it's a very very depressing situation, and I have to be honest. At this point, I think Israel's going too far. Now, I'm not anti-Israel in the sense that I think there's people who will single Israel out for condemnation when they turn a blind eye to what a lot of Arab states are doing against their citizens, their own citizens, particularly Bashar Assad over 10 years of war in Syria. But I do think Israel's going too far. I think this argument that they're just targeting Hamas is no longer stacking up. I think there are hardliners in Netanyahu's cabinet who want the collective punishment of all Palestinians. And even if that isn't the case, even if they're, taking caution, it's irrefutable that thousands of civilians have died. Even if the true figure is lower than what's being reported, 27,000, because Hamas runs the Gaza Health Ministry, it's a shocking number of civilian casualties. And it's no longer good enough to say, oh, well, Hamas hides among them. I think Israel's bombing campaign is no longer morally defensible when it's killing so many people. But there are no easy answers here, because the problem with a ceasefire is Hamas doesn't want it. Hamas's stated goal is the elimination of the Jewish state. In those circumstances, Israelis will feel they are literally fighting for their very survival. So there's a real sticking point here. I think maybe the only way this ends is for the Palestinians to displace Hamas themselves. Israel needs to stop its bombing campaign because it's causing far too much civilian casualties. I understand the Qataris are still working on this release of prisoners, hostages. That's definitely a major point. I mean, calling for a ceasefire in that circumstance whilst there's still hostages isn't plausible. But the simple reality is the more innocent Palestinians suffer, the more polarized Israel's going to be. And it's going to be harder and harder for Israel's allies, geopolitically speaking, i.e., Britain, America, and European countries, to support it, because it will be seen as morally indefensible. Yeah, I don't entirely go along with South Africa's argument that this is genocidal. I mean, they'd have to prove that there is an intent to kill all Palestinians, and there would have to be also an intent there in other areas. Now, I think Israel's going too far, and I'm not a jurist. I don't know how that will work. These things are always very, very complex. I mean, how it would work in terms of prosecuting that. Anyway, I'll go on to the next few questions. Let's see. Alon, welcome. What are your views on Rafah? Do you believe Israel should proceed? Maybe I'm missing something here, but Rafah is on the Egyptian side. So I wonder what's Egypt's role here. I mean, surely Egypt controls the Rafah crossing. Maybe I've missed that. I mean, the thing about Egypt is they're no friends of Hamas, which is they associate with the Muslim Brotherhood. So Egypt understandably won't want Hamas fighters flooding into Egypt. But I do think there's hypocrisy with the so-called Islamic Ummah. You know, Islamic countries will condemn Israel, yet what are they doing to help the Gazans in terms of actually providing refuge to them? But yeah, in terms of Rafah, I think that the problem we've got here is the Gazans are basically sitting in this densely populated area. Israel's bombing campaign is causing mass casualties, and it's all very well Israel saying, you know, move elsewhere, but they have literally nowhere else to go. So Egypt and Israel have a moral responsibility to open those border points, at least in some sort of humanitarian corridor. I don't think enough has been done so far, and then not enough aid is getting in. But I would think it is unreasonable to ask Israel to absolutely give Gaza everything when there is still significant amount of Hamas fighters actively, you know, fighting against Israel. Let's see. Do you think neighboring Islamic countries will get involved if Israel continues? Well, they already have. If we look at the Houthi attacks on mercantile shipping, you know, the argument is this is nothing to do with the war in Gaza, but it clearly is. They're ideologically sympathetic to Hamas. They also have deep anti-Israel, anti-Semitic narratives. There's no question about it. This conflict is widening. Then we look at what's happened in Iran this year. There was that major terrorist attack in a few days after the New Year, I believe, 80 killed. I think it was Iran's worst terrorist attack actually since the 70s. And then Iran's reprisals on Pakistan, on Iraq. There is a real risk that this could really escalate. I mean, the thing about the Middle East, it's never, ever tranquil. It's always a volatile region, always, certainly my whole lifetime. But it does seem to be particularly vulnerable right now. So, to answer your question, Jeremy, they've already got involved. Iran is unquestionably backing Hamas, maybe not directly, but unquestionably ideologically, they're there. From my understanding, Hamas does use human shield, but at the same time, some of the pro-Israel side exaggerated too. I could be wrong though. I'd agree with that. I mean, it is a little bit convenient for Israel to just say, well, Hamas hide behind civilians, so that explains the very high casualties. But in the end of the day, they have very modern equipment. They've got very powerful weapons, and there gets into moral argument. Okay, you have a Hamas fighter who's firing rockets at Israel with the intention of killing Israeli civilians. He's on top of a rooftop. The family underneath may or may not even know he is there. Israel then targets that house and kills a family of 12. I mean, where's the moral argument there? That's where it gets very murky because it's not without context. But I think the more Palestinian civilians who die and suffer, get horribly injured, displaced, the more Israel is going to be hated in the region. And I have a problem with comparing Israel to, for example, Russia or other combatants in other conflicts because there is a context, which is October the 7th, you know, a massive scale terrorist attack. And the notion that Israel is supposed to just accept that is absurd. But my concern about this is Israel is going too far and they are now basically engaging in collective punishment. It is true that Hamas uses civilian shields, but I think Israel could do more to minimize civilian casualties myself. Um, And I personally, I mean, I don't want to sound overtly sentimental here on these serious issues, but I think fundamentally a Palestinian child and an Israeli child, from a moral point of view, should be seen as absolutely equal. And I do think there is some Israelis and some pro-Israelis who are a bit desensitized to Palestinian suffering. I mean, a 9-year-old child or an elderly man or a pregnant woman who may have nothing to do with Hamas. I mean, the other thing to consider is Hamas is basically a dictatorship. They run Gaza with an iron fist. So people, even then, it's difficult to stand up against them. Palestinians have been killed for standing up to Hamas. So it's important to understand that context as well. There's no easy answers to this thing. But I do think Israel is going too far, and I think they risk losing support. But then again, those calling for a ceasefire need to look at Hamas's stated charter. There could be no ceasefire so long as Hamas wants the destruction of the Jewish state. It just isn't going to happen. More moderate Palestinian groups like Fatah, comparatively moderate, and others have long realized that Israel is not going anywhere. Let's see. Rafah is a city in Gaza that borders Egypt. Yeah, I mean, that's my point. Egypt surely has responsibility here as well. It's on the southern side of Gaza. Let's see. What do you think about the 55% approval rate of asylum for Chinese nationals who cross the Mexican border into America? Everyone from the middle class and poor finding a way to Mexico. I must be honest, this is news to me. Chinese nationals via direct flights or 40-day and 40-night boat rides. Honestly, I don't know enough about it to comment. This is news to me. I guess the question is, are they tourists? Are they business people? Are they fleeing persecution from the Communist Party? It's news to me, so I honestly can't say very much. But I guess it's a similar issue in the US-Mexico border as it is with the channel here between the UK and France. The argument is American conservatives make it too soft, and British conservatives say our border is too soft. Of course, they can no longer blame the EU. We're out of the EU. But honestly, I don't know enough about that to comment in detail. Hey, Nathan, hope you're doing well, mate. Thank you, JX. That's kind of you. I'm okay. I've got my sleeping structure back, so I'm feeling okay today. What's your opinion on housing? UK, Canada, US, China, Korea, etc. have all got expensive housing. Do you think the housing in developed cities is a neglected issue for the young generation? Well, of course, it varies in the UK as well. The further south we go, it's impossible. I mean, I live, just as a context, this house belongs to my parents. It's a Victorian townhouse, or very late Victorian, early Edwardian, 1901. And if this was in London, and we're by no means a wealthy family, but if this was in London, it would probably be 2 million on the market. But we live in the northeast of England, so this is, different locations. There's definitely a difference. But I do think it's daunting for young people wanting to get on the housing ladder for sure. But I don't know the answer to that. More house building is definitely something that should be considered, I think. The Chinese are arriving and risking the application for political asylum as the approval rate is so high. What's a similar issue in Europe in terms of who is legitimate and who isn't? In Europe, we have the issue of so-called economic migrants. That is people from poor European countries like Albania, which are not necessarily at war and they're not fleeing political persecution. They just want to come to Britain because it's a wealthier country. And I have to say that Albanian Premier, I think he had quite an arrogant attitude to sort of not take responsibility for the problem. I blame it on the British side for ostensibly being prejudiced against Albanians. In the end of the day, the UK is a small country geographically. We're not a big country. So every country has a responsibility for its borders. I am genuinely sympathetic to people who really are fleeing persecution. But we had that issue recently, if you guys have been watching the news, I was going to say acid attacker, the alkaline attacker in London. It's been purported he was an Afghan national. It's been purported that he converted to Christianity just as a ruse. Like, I don't know about that. I've known Christians from that part of the world. I knew a young Iranian guy. He was a Christian. His family was Christian. Now, without question, there's persecution going on there. On the other hand, it may well be a ruse whereby someone could just say they've converted to Christianity. They go to a couple of church services. A lot of churches, especially the Church of England nowadays, is ideologically very left wing. So, they feel there's a moral responsibility to help out, but may well be a scam. Priti Patel and Suella Braverman have pointed this out. So I think churches need to be maybe a little bit more meticulous and say, is this person really a Christian? Do they come from a Christian family, or is it just a ruse? But anything to do with immigration is very complex, inevitably. Look up the 60 Minutes episode showing the greatest number of border crossings are now being done by Chinese nationals through Mexico. That's interesting. It may well be that they're taking advantage of that, but certainly I would have thought it's not the safest part of the world to travel through with the ongoing cartel wars. And I imagine they're flying to Mexico, and I don't know. That's new to me. Do you believe Ukraine and Taiwan's fates are as connected as people claim? Many believe if Ukraine is defeated, that it will embolden China to invade Taiwan. I think China is definitely watching this situation closely, and so is Taiwan. I think there are analogies. In both cases, you have a smaller country, and for this context, I'll call Taiwan a country, that have been subjugated and bullied by larger neighbors. There are some differences. Ukraine is internationally recognized as a nation state, whereas Taiwan has very limited recognition. But there are parallels. Both China and Russia are totalitarian regimes. Both are run by leaders who have irredentist obsessions. That is, looking at former glory and former reclaiming of land, ostensibly. If Ukraine loses this war, I think that will be the greatest tragedy in Europe since World War II. I think it will be so devastating, obviously, foremost for the people of Ukraine, but I think a lot of Europeans will be disheartened. I'd be disheartened. I would feel that the world has allowed that to happen. And it would be fairly depressing. And I do think it would embolden China. There are differences, though. Ukraine is mostly a landlocked country. Taiwan's an island. As much as the Chinese side, as in the PRC, has a much, much bigger military, Taiwan wouldn't be easy to invade because of its geography. Apparently, to have a land invasion of Taiwan, it's a largely urban society, so it's not like beaches. It wouldn't be easy to land there. The Taiwanese would put up a fierce defense, backed by Western countries. The United States would be treaty bound, I understand, to defend Taiwan. Australia would probably defend Taiwan. Japan may not get involved in an active war, but they would fiercely condemn China. So would South Korea. China may well think, yes, we'll get sanctions, but it's worth it. I don't know. If they will go to the point of an invasion outright in the event that Ukraine's defeated. I sincerely hope Ukraine isn't defeated. Rishi Sunak recently made the point, this is like a 1942 moment, and he's referring to the fact, I've quoted this a few times in my videos, that in 1942, during World War II, there would have been a lot of moments where it felt like there was no hope, that Imperial Japan and the Third Reich were unstoppable. But what happened? Both were defeated. And, historic events, there's parallels, but there are differences as well. But I like to think Sunak's right. This is a 1942 moment. The war in Ukraine isn't going to end anytime soon, but one day it will end in some context. What Trump is proposing, basically, to sell out Ukraine completely, force the Ukrainians to give up a big chunk of their land they think is indefensible. Anyway, let's see. I'm just trying to catch up with the comments. Hello, Nathan. How are you? Welcome, Declan. I'm okay, thanks. My sleeping structure is back, so I feel a bit better today, I have to say. But yeah, Alan, that's a good question. I do think, Ukrainians and Taiwanese have definitely, although they're thousands of miles apart, I think they could definitely relate. and goes without saying I'm sympathetic to both. I did actually try to get an article published in a Taiwanese publication. Unfortunately, the editor politely rejected it. I had a piece on the Foreign Secretary's stance towards China. James Cleverly, I thought he was giving too much ground. Sunak and Cleverly talked tough on China, particularly Sunak, and I think they've gone soft, quite frankly. Disappointed. I mean, as an example, Rishi Sunak said that during his leadership run that he would ban Confucius Institutes. The only thing that's happened is they've stopped government funding, but Confucius Institutes still very much exist in this country. Most other Western countries have got rid of them. Recovering from a cold, I think, annoying cough and constant throat clearing it's a pain, but other than that, I'm fine. Sorry to hear that, Declan. I know that's a drag, never much fun. It's just distracting, isn't it? I mean, this goes without saying, but try if you've got any lemons, hot water, that can be very helpful with all the vitamin C. Another thing I would try is get a sink, like submerge your head totally in water and blow. It sounds silly, but I find it helps the sinuses and stuff. So good luck with that. I know it's not much fun. It's a dark and scary time, but I'm sure Ukraine and Taiwan will both hopefully prevail as long as the West continues to have moderate governments. Well, that's the key point, isn't it? I mean, I think European countries need to be preparing for the real possibility that Trump will get back in. Trump cannot be trusted with Ukraine. I think the man flip flops. I think he's ideologically bankrupt. So Europe has to be prepared to step up. Actually, Europe has apparently given slightly more to Ukraine than the United States. So the narrative of America propping Europe up isn't entirely true. But no doubt the Ukrainians will be very nervous about this. Before I started this live stream, there was a video saying Biden and NATO hit back at Trump's claims, which injure NATO troops. I'm not sure specifically what this is referring to. I'm going to look at the video afterwards. But I do think Trump's a liability, and the scary thing is he might well get in with Mr. Biden's. Let's face it, his memory seems to be going. I've stopped drinking fizzy and just drinking water and sucking lozenges. I will try that trick. Lozenges can be quite effective. Do you plan on watching Tucker Carlson's interview of Putin? I've already seen a bit of it, actually, because some other news sources have shown little snippets here and there. I don't know where it's going to be shown, probably on his own website. Quite honestly, I'm not sure if I could stomach to watch it. But I got heavily criticized and made a video recently on Tucker Carlson. And I'll just keep doing this as I'm talking. And basically, I was targeted by a few pro-Russian trolls, and I got accused of censorship. But the reason I blocked comments on that video is because there was too many dodgy accounts that looked set up solely to attack me. I mean, they had no content, no anything, just a series of numbers. And I'm always a little bit suspicious of that, because it shows an account that has just been set up. But I will say this, Carlson asked one important question, which was about, he brought up the issue of the journalist, I forget the guy's name now, Evan Gershkovich, I think he's called, American journalist held in Russia on trumped-up charges. He did bring that up. He also asked Putin a lot of comfortable questions. I haven't seen the whole interview. I was very critical of it because Carlson made several false claims. He said he's the only Western journalist who has approached Putin. It's simply not true. Putin has been interviewed by Western journalists in the past. And since the invasion of Ukraine, Steve Rosenberg of the BBC pointed this out. He's pitched to, he's the Moscow correspondent. He's pitched to get interviews with Putin on CNN. They have as well. I mean, Carlson was given star treatment in Russia. I don't trust the guy. I think he's a Putin apologist. I think he's a Putin propagandist. So I think that interview legitimizes Putin. And the notion that he hasn't been given a voice, I have a big problem with this. Because if Carlson's really interested in balance, is he then going to lobby for an interview with Russian opposition figures, such as Alexei Navalny? Will the Russian authorities let him go to that prison in Siberia and interview Navalny? If not, why not? So, I think Carlson, that question about the journalists, I think the only reason he done it was to deflect criticism that he's a Russian stooge, pro-Russian stooge. I'm afraid I don't have a high opinion of Tucker Carlson. He claims he's being an objective journalist, but if you come out in support of one side, so obviously then it's difficult to make that claim. I am absolutely pro-Ukraine, anti-Putin. If I were to interview, if I ever got to that point and I was to interview, say, a Russian nationalist MP, never get to interview Putin, of course, but if I ever got into that position, I'd ask some tough questions, but I'd also try and get their point of view. Of course, I would. But I also think there's an issue here of legitimizing tyranny by giving them a platform. And in the West, we have such a thing about free speech that it's this narrative. Oh well, if you don't give them a voice, then you're being a hypocrite. But there is also an argument when Russia is so quick to crush dissent. Why should Russian nationalists and the autocrat himself be given a voice in that context? Anyway, it's a false claim that Carlson said, Americans don't know what the war in Ukraine's about. Well, if they're misinformed, it's not because of Putin himself. Putin has repeatedly said what this is about. Putin has repeatedly stated his aims, the so-called denazification of Ukraine. So that's another porky from Tucker Carlson. So anyway, sorry for that long answer, Alan, but that's my thoughts. In one part of the interview, Putin blames Poland for starting World War II. I mean, that's why I don't really want to watch it, because quite honestly, I don't think I could stomach to watch it. This is utterly perverse. Talking of World War II, shortly after Germany invaded Poland, Russia, it's lesser known, but Russia also invaded Poland. This was before Operation Barbarossa in 1941. Russia also invaded under Stalin and occupied Poland. This is why Poles have such strong anti-Russian sentiments. Fisherman's friends I usually have. Yeah, slightly different subject there, but any lozenges, Declan, should be good for that. Excuse me, I hope I'm getting something here. But yeah, I think another thing about Tucker Carlson, I think this has made him more famous, and I'm not sure that he deserves it. I don't think it's entirely brave what he's doing when he's already a pro-Putin figure, so he has no real risks in Russia. Now, a Putin critic would have very real risks. So I don't think there's anything particularly brave about what Carlson's done. In fact, arguably quite the opposite. He never asked, as I gather, about, and maybe you could set the record straight, Alan, but as I gather, he never brought up the issue of Russian journalists. He never brought up the issue of the fate of Russian opposition figures and lack of free speech within Russia. So, if he's using this opportunity, this big grand opportunity he's talking about, then he should have brought those things up. And if he had done so, then I'd retract what I said about him, but stand by the fact that the man's record speaks for itself. Like I say, the comments can take a few seconds to appear, so. When I blocked the comments on the Carlson video, like I say, because of pro-Russian trolls, I think I may have done the right thing, because they're notably absent. I didn't block them as individuals, so they'd be welcome to come up to this live stream and have a go at me, but they're noticeably absent. So that suggests to me that they did indeed make those accounts as trolls, just to attack me. That says a lot. Tucker didn't ask any tough questions like what you suggested. Well, exactly. That's what I speculated on. I'm aware that there's a sort of, I am setting myself up for potential, attack, because people will say, well, if you haven't watched the interview, how can you attack him? But you've just clarified it all on. This is precisely what I expected would happen. So in a way, I don't really want to watch it. I don't want to add to his viewership. It's not that would make much difference, but I think Carlson's got, in a way, that expression, all publicity is good publicity. Well, he's been strongly condemned from other Western journalists, but it's made him a little bit more famous. He was already pretty famous. It's made him even more famous. And I think he's being hyped up into something that he's not, like this brave, investigative journalist who's doing his job. But I think that is an insult to journalists who've risked their lives. One example I would give is Anna Politkovskaya. She was a Russian journalist who wrote a book critical of Putin in the early 2000s, and she was murdered. And of course, as with everything in Russia, it was all shady, criminal elements were blamed, but there's just a long trajectory of this happening. So it doesn't at all surprise me, and that's why I don't really want to legitimize it. But I think my basis for feeling that Carlson would be pro-Putin is well placed because it's his track record. It's his track record. I mean, frankly, even if he hadn't been a Putin cheerleader, I think any journalist wanting to interview Putin would need to go in with a very clear objective that they're not going to let him off the hook, not give him an easy time of it. And from what I gather, Tucker only asked one or two significant questions. The rest, I assume, would have been pandering. But, he also lambasted the Western media. He said it was ugly propaganda against Russia. Well, if Carlson feels that strongly, then why doesn't he just join Russia today and be done with it and relocate to Moscow? Clearly, he'd be happier there. Let's see. King of America 97, welcome. What are your thoughts on Robert Kennedy Jr. running for the Democratic nomination? Haven't heard anything about him quite a while. Good. I hope he drops out. Frankly, I think he shames the Kennedy name. The little I've seen of Robert Kennedy Jr., I think I've seen enough to say this. He has very questionable stances on Russia and Ukraine. He is a conspiracy theorist of the worst kind. I think he's a toxic character. Now, in the past, I understand he got pundits for being an environmental lawyer, but I think he shames the Kennedy name. I mean, President Kennedy and his own father, Robert F. Kennedy, were, in my view, statesmen. But not all the Kennedy clan are like that. I mean, I'm critical of Joe Kennedy, that is the patriarch of the Kennedy clan, because he was a Hitler appeaser in the 30s. But yeah, I don't think highly of Robert Kennedy Jr., and I don't think he's a chance of. My understanding is he's now on the independent ticket. That is, he won't be running as a Democrat. But traditionally, third-party candidates, it's very, very difficult to get traction. If my history serves me correctly, 1972 or 1968, George Wallace in Alabama pulled a few states. Let's see, 1992, Ross Perot, and I think 1996, Ralph Nader. But other than that, there's not many occasions where a third-party candidate does well. But this year, everything will be up in the air. I think this election is going to be. I mean, if it's a rerun of Biden and Trump, and I think it's an awful choice, but if it is, there is a historic precedent, 1956, Adlai Stevenson versus Dwight D. Eisenhower. Both candidates had run before. But like I say, the far, far less toxic then, even during the Cold War, even with, the Red Scare going on, wasn't the same level of toxicity. So yeah, to answer that question, I don't think highly of Robert Kennedy Jr. In terms of third-party candidates, there's always, Mickey Mouse candidates like that guy Vermin Supreme, who's run, I think, in every presidential election for the last 8 years, but hasn't a chance in hell of polling even any delegate, I don't think. I was explaining to my mother yesterday the American political system. I'm trying to compare it to our system of first past the post, i.e. the delegate counts and so on. Obviously, the different systems, but in America, of course, blue is Democrat, red is Republican, yet their sister parties in the UK, red is for Labour, which is aligned more with the Democrats. It's the other way around, and blue is Conservative. Be an interesting situation this year where we could have a British general election and an American presidential election in the same month, and that almost never happens. There's not many British elections are in a year with four. It's just a little bit of trivia. I mean, most British elections are in uneven years, like fives, ones, and so on. Um, so that's just a little bit of trivia. It might be the first election I can think of where the American election and British election are in the same month, because it's been speculated that our election is going to be November. But our election cycle is much, much shorter than the American cycle, which is over a year. Ours is just over a month. Basically, it's announced by the Prime Minister, and then a month later it happens, and it all happens in 1 day. What are your views on Douglas Murray? I have a book by Douglas Murray, actually, The Madness of Crowds. I haven't got around to reading it yet. Well, he's obviously a conservative character. He's obviously well to the right. I agree with a lot of his positions, certainly on woke ideology and that sort of thing. I haven't agreed with all of his positions. I think he's finally seen the light regarding Donald Trump, but it took him long enough. I also think I remember he had one post on gun violence in America, and I did differ with him on that, because he said the Democrats were using emotions, and I think he was turning a blind eye to the Republican record there. But overall, he'd be more to the right than myself, but I agree with some of his positions. And there's been a few occasions people have tried to catch Douglas Murray out. He's a very, very smart guy. For example, there was one gay commentator who was talking about LGBT bigotry, trans bigotry, etc., and was having a go at Douglas Murray about this, except he scored an own goal when Murray said, well, actually, I'm a gay man, I was outed years ago. So he tried calling Douglas Murray homophobic, and he made a fool of himself in the process. So I quite respect Douglas Murray. I don't agree with all of his positions. I think he's definitely quite hard right, whereas I'm a centrist. But I do agree with his positions on woke ideology and the toxicity of identity politics. I haven't read The Madness of Crowds yet, but I look forward to it. I think it should be a good read. So that's my thoughts on Douglas Murray. But like I say, he's one of these characters that I endorse some of his positions, but I can't get on board with everything. King of America 97, Teddy Roosevelt ran for a third party. Yeah, good point. In 1912 and came pretty close to winning. There's been so much speculation as to how he'd have handled World War One, because he was much more pro-interventionist. That's a good point. It's one of those what ifs of history. Of course, I associate Teddy Roosevelt with the Rough Riders and the Spanish-American War. I think if my history serves me correctly, Roosevelt had fallen out with the Republicans. Interestingly enough, something similar happened in the UK at that time. David Lloyd George, the Liberal Chancellor, fell out with the Liberal Prime Minister, Henry Herbert Asquith, and they had a very difficult relationship. 1916, the Shells crisis, that was a shortage of munitions for the Western Front. David Lloyd George then became Prime Minister, and he's considered one of our greatest Prime Ministers. But it's a good question, King of America, if Teddy Roosevelt had been a leader in World War One. I know Wilson, obviously, in international circles, is held in high regard because of the League of Nations. But the last year or 2 years of his presidency, I think he suffered a severe stroke. It's sometimes said, actually, Edith Wilson, the First Lady, was the de facto president, which may have made her de facto the first woman president, although she didn't have that title, because she was doing a lot of her husband's administrative work at that point. During the 2016 election, did you often wonder what Trump meant with the repeat soundbites, aka Make America Great Again? Not really. I think it was a marketing strategy. Reagan actually done something similar when he ran, although Reagan was not as extreme a character. But it's a salesman's pitch. It's a similar thing in Britain with let's get Brexit done. Populism relies on simplicity. And if you repeat a line over and over and over again, it has a somewhat hypnotic effect. So, Make America Great Again it's short on detail, but it works. I mean, I cannot stand Donald Trump, but he knows how to market. He knows how to popularize. Although I should say the actual support that Trump has can't be exaggerated, because his supporters, there's a very fierce support base there. But in actual polling and actual results, He lost the popular vote twice. He won by electoral college in 2016. So I think his actual popularity shouldn't be exaggerated. Do you know who Hassanabi is? If so, what are your views on him? I must admit, I don't, Alon. I'm going to go out on a limb and say he's a YouTuber, but I could be dead wrong there. But I don't know who the guy is. So. But good questions, guys. Thanks for your participation today. Like I say, with a live stream, I always need questions, topics to make it work. Just on presidential history, my understanding is presidents who won with just the electoral college and not the popular vote. We need to go back to George W. Bush in 2000, and then there was a couple of other examples. I think possibly Herbert Hoover in 1928, or definitely Rutherford B. Hayes back in 1877, I believe. So it's only happened a few times in American history. Also, a bit of trivia: if Trump gets in again, he'll be only the second president to have a non-consecutive term. That is Grover Cleveland in the 1890s. He's also been criticised for being a champagne socialist since he's rich and lives a capitalist lifestyle. Hassanabi, but he certainly wouldn't be the first champagne socialist. So is he pretty hard left? Does he pontificate on those things? Is he a YouTuber, Alan? Just checking if comments are coming through. Like I say, sometimes they can take time. But I did put the replay button, so that should make them appear in retrospect. So I've done this. Let's see, 57 minutes. I'll give another 10 minutes, guys, if that's okay, because there's a lot to do today. But I thought it was about time to do a live stream. I think sometimes people leave comments and a couple appear at once and sort of trickles through. I've been watching Big Bang Theory this morning. I got into that series during lockdown because I'm a big Friends fan, as you can tell there, posters. But I wanted to watch something a little bit more contemporary, more 21st century, and I must admit I got really into it. So I don't know if you guys have seen Big Bang Theory, what you think of it. It's comedy. If you don't know, it's a comedy series about a group of young physicists that live in Pasadena, Los Angeles, and just their relationships and foibles. Pretty successful show in the 2000s and early 2010s. The late 2000s and throughout the 2010s, I should say. Hassan's largest controversy was in 2019 when he claimed America deserved 9/11. I see. So he's of that school of thought. Yeah, I really cannot stomach that sort of ideology of, if we look across the board, no civilians deserve terrorist attack, regardless of what the government's done. I even said that, when a few years back there was a knife attack in the city of Kunming in China. A Uyghur attacker just went on a rampage and knifed a lot of people and fixed set off a device as well, and over 30 people were killed. It's terrorism. I think it's always legitimate to target military or government in that sort of situation, although I'm not saying that I support that as an ideology, but at least it's, militants, but targeting civilians is. And getting back to Israel and Palestine, Israel could keep saying it's taking caution, but a civilian death is a civilian death. He's a far left Twitch streamer and is disliked for his takes on geopolitics. Yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure I will want to vacuum much of my energy into someone like that, because there's a lot of them pollute cyberspace with their nonsense. Just in closing here, that reminds me of someone. I made a video about years ago. So she was a Thai national, and basically she was obviously on the left of Thai politics. But if you know anything about Thailand, they've got very serious, strict lèse majesté laws there, which basically means you could go to prison for perceived insults against a king or his family. Well, it was a free speech issue, and I stood up for her. I made videos supporting her. She actually got refuge in the UK, and some of my most viewed videos were videos I made on her behalf, because it was the principle of it. She was Thai royalists were actually attacking her in her house in London, and it made me very angry that they brought that mentality here. I mean, we're a monarchy, but we're not an absolute monarchy. So, unfortunately, in recent years, around the pandemic, I looked at her social media accounts, and it was full of manure. It was full of anti-West diatribes, pro-Russia messages, and I was completely disgusted. My thoughts were, wait a second, this country has given you refuge, and you're churning out conspiracy theories about the British royal family, pro-Putin narratives, anti-Semitic tropes, just complete manure on her social media feeds. So I unfriended her, and I didn't get into a thing about it, but I was disgusted. I thought, is this the thanks we get? Is this the thanks that you're giving to the country that gave you refuge? I was disgusted by it. Was a strange choice for someone who was so Republican with a small r to come to a country with a monarchy. It's of a strange choice. Why not go to France or the United States? But it could well be that her far left views were such that she wasn't welcome there. Hannah, I must admit, I'm kind of intrigued by this guy. What's his name? Hannah. I'm just scrolling back here. Oh, it's a bit back. Just bear with me a second. Hannah. Oh, where's the original comment? Alon, you asked about this guy. Yeah, Hassanabi. His background, Alon. Is he a Westerner? Is he an Arab? What's his background? I mean, we have plenty of them in this country. Ash Sarkar, who worked for Novara Media, she's open communist, yet she's a young woman, so she wouldn't have even been born probably during the Cold War. They can't stomach the hypocrisy of those who denounce the West whilst they take all the advantages of our free expression. I mean, if you take a hardline position, particularly far left in our societies, you might get ridiculed and criticized, but more or less they can do it. It just wouldn't be possible to be a dissident in Russia or China in the same way. So I cannot stand the hypocrisy of people who take that sort of worldview. So, like I said, I'll give this a few more minutes, guys, because actually I want to get lunch as well and do a few other things. Jamali, I don't know if you're still there, but I hope you get some more sleep. Probably taking a few seconds for comments to appear. And Declan, I hope that cold goes. I know what that's like, mate. It's not fun, so hope that goes. Do try that technique about literally submerging your head if you can in a sink. It can actually work with sinuses. Address the next few comments and then round this up. But I think it's been a good live stream. Like I say, the idea with this is always to get some interaction with my subscribers. It's always good to see new names as well, if people haven't logged in before. I don't know what my next regular video is going to be. I have a number of topics I want to talk about, but to be honest, these days I'm also working on a lot of general space issues. When I upload a video, it takes up a fair bit of space on my on my folder, so I always have to factor that in. Okay, I'll give this a few more minutes, just see if any more comments come through. Nicer day today, that's good. It's been horrible weather up here recently, so it's good to see better weather today. It feels like spring, although I haven't been outside yet. Okay, guys, if there's no more questions, no more comments, I don't know if they're just taking time to appear. I might just round this up. But thanks for your participation as usual. It's always welcome. There's no point of doing live streams without participation, so thank you. Where is Mrs. Centrist? Good question. Well, she is a work in progress. Basically, that's the best answer I can give. No, without going into too many details, I am actually in a long distance relationship with someone, a young lady that I met through eHarmony. We're still in touch. I've been in touch with her for a long time, but there's complicated circumstances that we're just working our way around. With long distance relationships, there are always complicated questions. So that's the answer. But hopefully, it will lead to something. We actually joked a while back that we could maybe do a joint video. I'm not going to talk too much about it at this point, simply because nothing is confirmed. So I don't want to, give a spoiler before the main event, so to speak. Ray, welcome. I'm afraid, Ray, I'm just about to round up this live stream, but I'll just answer your question quickly. Hi, Nathan. How come Americans don't believe in NHS like Britain? Ask an American. My speculation would be that a lot of Americans get this idea that it's socialized healthcare. And the thing is, I mean, I suppose technically it is because it was set up by the Labour Party in that Attlee government of the late 40s. But what I always say about the NHS is it is not perfect. Clearly, there is problems in the NHS with waiting lists, with the pressure that's on the system. But the principle of it is a very, very good thing. And I don't like the Tories' hostility to the principle of the NHS, which is healthcare on the point of treatment, free healthcare. I do think it's a human right. I think if someone has a serious medical condition, they're in physical pain, it should be a basic human right that they have access to healthcare. I've never been comfortable with the American idea of, okay, there's some very good treatment, world-class doctors, but you go in after a road accident, and by the way, here's the bill. And if someone's not insured, then what? I think there's millions of Americans who are basically having to suffer because they do not have access to healthcare, and that's absurd in the world's most powerful country. It's not that our health system's perfect. We do have a lot of pressure on the NHS, but to answer your question, Ray, I think I mean, maybe my American viewers can answer this, but I think it is this perception of socialized healthcare. But to me, it's a basic principle. It's basic human rights. People should have access to healthcare. And there are questions about, bad lifestyle choices. Should maybe, for example, heavy smokers pay their own bills? Should morbidly obese people pay their own bills? But where do you draw a line? I mean, many cancers are said to be caused by the additives that are in food. But do we just then blame everyone who has a microwave meal? That's the problem. Where do you draw a line? 10K or in Australia, full out of pocket costs if you pay privately. Odd, all Australian dollars, right? Bring her to you, my friend, even if it's just for a short holiday. That's the plan. Or I'll go over to her. I don't want to go into too many details here, like I say, just because it's a work in progress. But definitely, I mean, I'm not interested in having a long distance relationship online. She feels the same way, so we have to meet at some point. I mean, it's one thing getting on very well in a video, but really, I want to know how I feel with her. That's the key thing. So that is the plan in 2024. But it all comes down to money. You know, money is always an issue. So a long haul flight is not cheap. It didn't show me previous comments. Strange. I was correcting something I said in a large paragraph. Yeah, sorry about that. It's just, I mean, when I do these live streams, I always do the replay thing. hopefully it should make it easier for subscribers to read previous comments, but that's not, I'm not doing that. That's something YouTube's doing, so apologies for that. I'll give that a few more seconds so that you can amend that. But yeah, Hasanabi, I might look the guy up if I could stomach it. But I'll be honest, guys, there's another thing, when I find those sort of worldviews that I find quite toxic, I try to subject myself to them less, because honestly, they just work me up. And I find it depressing that you have a potentially big channel that is just spreading so much BS out there. So I find that depressing. I'm sorry, like I say, I really can't pronounce your name in the alphabet, but in that script. But I'm going to give it a few more seconds for see if that appears, and then I'll round this up. I'm actually getting quite hungry. But I'll say one thing, Ray. I am very grateful for the NHS. I mean, it's not one of the critiques is we treat it almost like a national institution. Some minister, I think it was a Tory minister, said it's the closest thing secular Britain has to national religion. Well, the NHS shouldn't be above criticism. I mean, there are grounds for critique, but I do believe in the principle of universal healthcare. I follow medical condition groups on Facebook. I've seen the cost of the same operation in America being as much as 100 to 150k Australian dollars versus full out-of-pocket private price of 10k Australian dollars. That's incredible. I mean, here's the thing about private healthcare. It's very good, very efficient. It's also very expensive. So it's fine for people who can afford it. And incidentally, I have no problem with giving them that choice. I would not rule out private healthcare. I'm all for people having that choice. But for people who simply cannot afford it, there has to be the principle of healthcare on the point of needing it without having a bill. I've seen in the American system a woman who was in labor, on her bill was obviously the initial treatment, staying in the hospital. One of the bills was mother to child touch, whatever it was, $20. It was probably more than that. I mean, that to me is hard to fathom. So yeah. How come Americans like Donald Trump cannot have America's best interest? He cannot have America's best interest. There must be some Americans who can't stand Trump. Well, there's millions of Americans who can't stand Trump. In 2020, Biden got 81 million votes, the biggest popular vote ever. But with the United States system, a candidate can get into office with the Electoral College, even if they lose the popular vote. And I think there's a very real chance of that happening this year. I'd be very shocked if Trump won the popular vote, but he could win the Electoral College again, as happened in 2016. But that's why I would say, Ray, there are millions of Americans who can't stand Trump. Unfortunately, I do think it's a personality cult. He's a salesman. He knows the pitches to give. There are also a lot of Americans who buy up his lies and buy up his brand. And, if people feel disillusioned by Biden, if they've lost their job, if there's those sort of things going on, if they're also, there'll be pushback against, some of the culture wars that are going on. Unfortunately, there is no conservative moderate able to stand. It's a very bad situation. But to answer your question, I think there are millions of Americans, a bit like there's millions of Americans who want common sense gun control. We have to remember America is a big, big country, the third most populous country in the world, 340 million people almost. So I don't think we can ever say Americans think this, Americans think that. There's a lot of diversity of opinion, and it does vary from state to state. But listen, guys, I'm going to round this up. I'm going to get lunch. Thank you for coming by. Stay tuned for my next video. I'm not sure what it will be, but I appreciate all the support. And like I say, with these live streams, I do them very inconsistently, just because people will be doing different things, different time zones, and so on. So thank you very much for coming by. And until next time, thank you. Have a good day.